Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and thanks for stopping by. Our dedicated team will guide you through with the latest updates and theories at Starbase, Texas. If you're new to the channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon for future streams.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Starbase Weekly live stream. My name is Zach Golden. Happy to be here with all of you today. Got a lot to cover at all these updates at Starbase. Luckily, we were able to get a flyover in this week. The weather, as a lot of you know, was not very favorable, so got very lucky, and we're initially not really expecting to even get one, but we were able to pull it off, and you'll notice that some of these images are a little bit hazy, but you know, that's better than not having anything at all. So thank you to RGV for getting up there and grabbing these amazing shots for us, because there's a lot of updates that are happening around the site. So, you know, definitely don't want to miss a week if possible. And joining me today is going to be Ryan Hansen Space. Ryan, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. As you said, there's a lot of updates, a lot of cool things to talk about, a lot of changes actually since these photos have been taken with the pace that SpaceX moves at. So we got a lot to cover and a lot of cool details to dig into.
Definitely. And for helping us out with questions and donations will be Lawrence, taking over for Joe for the week.
Thank you, RGV team, and Zach and Ryan, for allowing me to be here, and look forward to another good show.
Yeah, you know, I always get excited for these when I'm about to go on my 2 weeks off from work, and I've had very bad luck this year where every time I take off, the weather ends up being kind of bad. So my first day off, AstroGen told me there was most likely not going to be a flyover this week, and I was like, really? How does that always keep happening? But luckily we're able to do this. So yeah, we'll jump right in. And before we do, I want to mention, you know, I'm predicting that a good amount of you happen to be members or patrons for the Everyday Astronaut. And with that said, his part one of his Starbase tour is live on YouTube right now. So, you know, I'm sure there will be questions from that. But part two is still for members and patrons only right now. So even though we have seen it, we're going to not address any questions related to that. So Lawrence will have to filter those out, and I'm sure next week we'll be able to address some of those questions from part 2. All right. Well, with that, let's go ahead and hop in. So we have some cool updates from Massey's this week. I guess it's both Massey's and the launch site. We have last few weeks, I guess, have been waiting for this test for booster 14.1 to be completed. So they had a special device that was retrofitted for them to test the actual load pins on the booster, or the landing pins. Ryan, what have you been calling these? I go back and forth with different names.
I just call them the load points. Really, any point on the vehicle that takes the load or the mass of the vehicle while lifting or maneuvering it. I call them the load points.
Yeah. So I think a lot of us potentially were expecting this to be, the final test, really just making sure that these load pins are able to take the additional stress that will be on them during landing. So, I mean, we already know that it's able to lift a 250 to 275 ton booster, but with the additional weight that's going to be there for the residual fuel, so potentially up to 20 tons of residual fuel, plus the actual force of it landing on the landing rails, which I think we're expecting to be kind of minimal, but not zero. So it's just making sure that they're able to actually withstand that force. And so now that this test is complete, as y'all can see, this flyover happened right as they were preparing to move it away from the Massey site. And I think in some of the later images, we can actually see it moving. So down here towards the bottom, as they were transporting it to the launch site. So let's see, Ryan, do you think we should cover this now or wait until we get to the launch site?
We can maybe wait till we get to the launch site.
Cool. I had a feeling you were going to say that. I was debating, like, maybe we'll jump around, but yeah, we'll touch on this a little bit more later. So just stick around, and I guess that will be towards the second half of the show when we get into the booster 14.1 stuff. But either way, the fact that we're seeing lots of action with this is a pretty good sign. I would say that they're very serious about performing this first return to launch site landing on the next upcoming flight. So really exciting to see all that stuff, and I'm sure we'll have tons of questions and a lot of discussion related to that later in the show. And by the way, I'm already predicting, I said this before the show, I'm already predicting a lot of the questions that are going to get asked. So looking forward to that. But moving on, we do have some preparations ongoing back here, which most of you are aware of. So we've been expecting an expansion of the liquid oxygen tank farm. And as y'all can see, they have finished the foundations for those tanks. So as y'all can see, there's going to be at least three additional tanks in this area. And we have seen one tank arrive within the last few weeks, but that one went to the launch complex. So I think there's one additional coming to the launch complex and 3 coming here. So that's 4 tanks in total that should be arriving within the coming weeks, if not days.
I think it's worth noting too that the increase in LOX capacity we were discussing in show and tell last night might be enough for them to actually static fire a ship, do a cryo test of a ship and a cryo test of a booster, all within the relative same time. So that should definitely help them speed up the cadence as they're going to be producing more vehicles and testing them quicker and quicker.
Yeah. One thing that would be nice, given how much space is at this site, I'm going to see if I can get a better image to show the full overhead. There's a good amount of space in this back corner that's not being used. And especially, I mean, even just, what they have started constructing over. So I mean, even this area right here is just pretty large with nothing there. Um, and I imagine if they were able to also build out on this area, that they could build a small air separation plant. Um, I don't know if that's in their plans at all, but I think that would be interesting. I mean, the amount of deliveries that you have between this site and the launch site is quite a lot. So I imagine anything they can do to reduce traffic coming in and out and increase the rate of testing that they're able to do in the future. I wouldn't be surprised to see something like that. I mean, I think Ryan, you mentioned the possibility of a second flame trench in here at some point.
Yeah, it's if you look at the layout, the methane farm is kind of smack dab in the middle, which, could mean that if they get access to that triangle there on the left, that they could almost mirror over to the other side another flame trench to do ship static fires, which would definitely be pretty cool if they could do that. I think the main difference there is that the ramp going up to it might be a little interesting with the location of some of these tanks in the lower left, but I'm sure they could figure something out.
Yeah, I keep thinking back to when they had the two test stands at the launch complex, and they like rarely actually made use out of it. I think maybe on two separate occasions they actually used both of them. I'm thinking of like when SN9 and SN10 were at the launch site, and then I think there was a puck shucking test that happened at the same time as a static fire test, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that was primarily just because they needed to renovate the pad between, different launches and testing campaigns, so they kind of flip-flopped, so it wasn't a bottleneck. Versus with the flame trench, in theory, there really shouldn't be a lot of upkeep that it needs, and operationally, it's pretty quick to kind of get the ship on, test, and get it back off. So I think we're probably a while from that becoming a bottleneck in testing, but if they really do want to produce 1,000 ships in a year, as Elon has stated before, they're probably going to need another flame trench, and that's probably at least a few years off, if I had to guess.
Right. I'm just hoping to see an air separation plant somewhere. I was really disappointed when they removed the one that was previously at the Sanchez site. It looked like they were preparing to increase the capacity, and then they just deleted it. So I'm really hoping that it makes a comeback at some point. But moving on, there's still waiting on the remaining sections of this new test structure to be completed. They're now up to the third level, and there's still one more to go. It seems like there's some pieces over here, and I don't know. I guess I wouldn't be surprised if it gets even taller than that, because these. I'm gonna get a better image of this.
Yeah, the vertical pieces, I think, indicate that there might be another level on top of them. Yeah, there's a little bit of yep, right there that sticks up, and you can see the lead-ins are already attached to those, so that implies that something is going to go on top of these, but we're not sure, I guess, how tall that section might be.
Yeah, this is like a IKEA set that's taking forever to install. But part of the reason for this is because this is supposed to be a concrete filled structure, and so even though I think they're mostly, actually it's tough to tell. I think they're welded together on the ground, and then they also have to weld them once they install it. So you can kind of see those weld lines down here. So that's part of the reason that this takes so long, is because once it's lifted into place, it has to be welded on each of the 5 columns. So this is also a process that happens at the orbital launch tower as well too. So we're going to talk about that, because a lot of people have questions on how fast we can expect that structure to be completed. So these are things that are going to be recurring, both the concrete filled structure plus the amount of welding that's required in order to like reach that point where you can even start to pour concrete. So I know that last week we probably mentioned something related to the new hardware that was seen over here. And I don't know, Ryan, if you had anything you wanted to add on that. Where did it go? I'm looking for
It's
the.
under the tarp, down bottom left. They did actually cover it with tarp. So I was gonna ask. I mean, usually the tarp kind of indicates that they're doing some welding inside, trying to keep it out of the elements potentially. Um, it's an interesting little tent they've got, but yeah, this shape. I know a lot of people were initially thinking that this indicates that the boosters are going to have 35 engines because of the shape that it has and where the intersections are. If that's exactly where like a piston would be located in order to simulate the thrust on a 35 engine thrust puck. It doesn't. The layout of these vertical columns is not proper in order to vertically push on a puck in the location where the 15 central engines would actually fit. Yeah, here's a better photo. So there's 15 of these cylindrical columns that in theory would have a piston on top of them pushing up. The inner pentagon can actually fit if you account for the nozzle sizes for the 5 central engines, but the outer 10, they're not actually in the correct spot. They're not in the same spot that they would be on the current boosters. And looking back at the first thrust puck, it was actually created, not the thrust puck, but the simulator. It was created in roughly a similar manner, and that one only ended up using 33 pistons for the 33 engine puck, or the 13 engine puck. So this does not necessarily indicate that the boosters are going to go to 35 engines. It's mainly just giving them what I think is a way to fill this thing with concrete and distribute the load relatively evenly across the whole surface. But we'll just have to wait and see if they install the pistons exactly on top of these columns or not. I think that'll be the bigger indicator once this is filled with concrete and we get maybe some in-bed plates kind of welded to the top. But we'll have to wait and see for that. But for right now, I'm going to stick with this is probably for a 13 engine thrust puck simulator right now.
Do you think this is actually related to the other test structure? Like, I think the other one already has something at the bottom of it.
Yeah, so I think the theory is this piece is going to go in the middle, and they'll add some horizontal plates to connect it to the inner walls on this piece here. So that'll kind of form what they're going to fill with concrete, and then that piece will be dropped into here, probably sit on some stands while they kind of weld those pieces together, and then they'll fill it with concrete.
I'm surprised they haven't already started that. I mean, I guess it's not too difficult to like lift it through the top, but I feel like that piece is a late arrival or something.
Yeah, it is a little interesting because we know that inner ring kind of sat there for a while before really everything started to be assembled around it. So yeah, the timing is a little odd. It's definitely related, but yeah, it probably should have been constructed earlier.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what this ends up being used for other than a potential thrust puck simulator. I imagine it has multiple purposes other than just that, but certainly going to be something interesting to keep our eyes on. I also wonder if we'll see like actual test to destruction, test to failure. Like given how large of a frame this is, they might be trying to like actually contain the test section or the test article. Like if it does rupture, I kind of miss the days where you saw a lot of test to failures.
Yeah, that is a good point. I've often wondered if they're constructing it in a way where it could possibly be used for like HLS testing for certification on that, because you will need to crew rate an HLS rocket at some point. So I imagine there's a lot more rigorous testing that needs to be done, and it's possible this structure could allow them to do some testing involved with that.
Yeah, I would say there's a possibility that the what's the word I'm looking for? Safety factor is maybe higher for crew rated testing than it is for prototype vehicles. So they may test this, let's just say, to like I don't know, 10% above what it's expected to experience, versus a crew rating may require like 20% over. Um, so that's always an interesting thing, which we don't really get a lot of information on. We kind of just like have to sit around and watch what they do and kind of piece together what's going on. But yeah, that would be an interesting question to learn about, how that certification difference is between those two types of vehicles.
Yeah, and I guess I go back to the idea that this structure seems a bit excessive to be kind of a one and done test of a, say it is a 15 engine puck. To construct this and only, get that use out of it seems a bit excessive. So I feel like regardless, this needs to be kind of a multi-test, capable test stand.
Right. Let's see. Anything else at Massey's that we should talk about? I guess we could mention the flame trench a little bit.
Yeah, we got some new views down inside the flame trench.
Trying to find the right angle. Here we go. This might be it. Yeah, so I know
Yeah.
last week there was some good views, but it was a more overhead view, so we're kind of looking straight down into it. Versus this week, we can see a little bit below the actual. I call this the drive over or the roof. So yeah, actually able to look down here. And there's pretty interesting things. I guess number one is this drop-in walkway, which has a ladder going down so they can access the maintenance platforms below. But beyond that, there's an interesting structure down here, which kind of been trying to figure out. Ryan, did you have any ideas on this?
Yeah, there's a couple ideas. I know we discussed some stuff in the show and tell. Can you try the image to the right? I wonder if that has a different exposure setting on it. Yeah, that one might show a little more detail. So the perspective here is a little misleading. It definitely looks like there's a box down here. Not sure if that is permanent. I think the only indicator is that there appears to be a pipe coming out the side of it and then running kind of up to the top of the frame, which I think for a while we believed might be something related to like a sump pump type system to recover some water. So this does look like it's maybe more of a permanent structure. And at this angle, it's hard to tell, I guess, its height compared to the trench height, but I believe this box is actually below the height of the ramp. So as the exhaust is kind of shooting over the top of this, it wouldn't actually hit it per se. It would just exist down kind of just below that. So the plume should not have too much energy by the time it hits that area. So my thought on this is that it could possibly be something related to the pump system to reclaim water that is in this trench. That could be part of like a filtering system that they've got down there, where it'll filter out any of the particles that they don't want to then pump back into the tanks up above.
Right. Yeah, these views are super helpful. Ryan and I have been working on an episode about just explaining everything related to this flame trench, and I think these details help out with that a lot. There's a lot of things that we didn't previously know were here, that are now visible. So it's really cool that they actually have the leaving the overhead platform retracted so that you can actually see down here.
And regarding the white structure, I'm actually not sure if that actually goes down to the platforms at the back of the flame trench. I think that it purely might just be for inspecting the rails that are along the sides. Because if you look kind of at the bottom right-hand corner, there's like a ladder. So there's that structure. And then over here to the right, there's kind of this strange pipe structure that's kind of turned toward us. I believe that is actually the ladder that's going down to those inspection platforms down below.
Yeah, this kind of looks like a
They call
little
those like
safety
fall
harness.
arresters, or
Yeah. So then just a ladder down to there.
I believe that's just a temporary ladder down to that lower area. And this white structure we've seen before, it was sitting off to the side. and I'm guessing they just kind of lift it, from side to side when they're doing inspections of those rails. So I don't think it's actually related to access down below.
That makes sense. Wonder if this actually is able to slide, or if they have to like actually lift it and move it over. I think we've kind of covered most everything at Massey's. I see a few questions in the comments. Lawrence, do you have access to that question bot?
Yeah, I do. And we do have a ton of support and some questions for Massey's. I want to start out with Flip Diaz gifted a membership first before the show. Then we had Not Tom B, Callistia Lee, and Jake Winlow all gifting 5 memberships. So that's 16 new memberships right there. Then we had Pete 2.0 gifting, doing a $2 super chat.
Still with us there, Lawrence?
Yeah, sorry about that. And I believe the first question is from Space Girl X, and the question is regarding the upper left hand corner of Massey's. Why don't they fill it in?
I believe the simple answer is that SpaceX doesn't actually own that land. I believe that's owned by the government currently. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Zach.
I'm not sure on that, but yeah, I mean, I'm not sure who the owner is, but yeah, they probably just don't have permission to build on this yet.
Okay, the next question is from Brian Illenberg, and he says, if he recalls correctly, SpaceX tests to 1.4 times expected load as required for human rating.
That could be the case. I don't remember hearing that. I think the only place we would have maybe heard that is the Everyday Astronaut's like first or second tour of Starbase. I'd probably have to go back and review that, but as far as I know, that sounds like it could be right.
I'm just checking to see if there's anything else.
I do see one in the chat right now. Says, since they work at that new thrust simulator outside in the elements under a tarp, is it better known now what the new building on the right hand side is good for? No. I mean, I think we haven't really ever figured this out, but with how many vehicles are outside of here, it's possible that this is like just one of their engineering buildings, or their control room essentially for this entire site. But I don't think we have any other ideas other than that.
I think a lot of the hardware might be too big to necessarily build in there if you account for other space. So they're probably able to do some, smaller engineering stuff in there. But as far as these larger pieces, it's just easier to deal with them outside, because then you don't have to, deal with maneuvering them in tight places.
Agreed.
Cool. Well,
all right.
Shall I move on to Sanchez?
Yeah, looks like we're all wrapped up for Massey's.
Awesome. So moving over to the Sanchez site, we are still waiting on the arrival of the remaining tower sections. So right now they've kind of been working on preparing a lot of the pipework that's going to go inside of these. And I actually am not sure if these were constructed here or if they brought them over from Florida, because I thought that they had some of these already constructed at the Roberts Road facility. But there should be a lot more of these, I think. And we do have some more pipework down here, which they've not really gotten started on. They may have done some joining of these sections, but not very much. So that's a little bit surprising, but this is kind of one of those things that leads into how long it's going to take for them to actually complete this structure. And I don't think it's as fast as some people seem to be expecting. But it's pretty clear that they will install all of this mechanical system they before they stack it. So that's one of the things that we're going to have to see completed before we expect them to start moving all of this stuff over to the launch site. And we're going to kind of touch on that a little bit more, because once we get to see the actual base of the tower, we'll get a better idea of what all goes into stacking all of this. And like I said, a lot of people seem to expect this to be completed before the 5th flight test, and I think that's pretty far out of the realm of possibility. But they're still fast, just not that fast. But yeah, there's a lot of auxiliary equipment that they still are waiting to install down here. Some of these, I think, actually go on the base of the tower itself. Like these pieces right here, I think, go on the base of the tower. And we still have not seen the scaffolding that will go around the corners as well either. So that's another thing that we'll be expecting to see before they are actually ready to start moving this stuff. But what's really cool down here, and we kind of saw a good amount of this, if those of you who have seen part 1 of the Everyday Astronauts tour of Starbase, there's a lot of new workstations inside of the Star Factory, which a lot of that stuff we've actually seen constructed out here in the Sanchez site, which is weird. Actually, I'm surprised they're not just building it inside of the factory itself. But I think after looking at that video, it's probably just because they have a lot of areas sectioned off for construction and don't want to interrupt that for building all of this equipment. So a lot of different staircases and platforms that are used in the various workstations. And that was one of the cool things about that tour, is actually being able to see some of the new workstations, specifically for the nose cone of the ships. I think that's mostly what we really got a good view of.
Yeah, that's one benefit of the factory, is that they have a lot of proprietary workstations and jigs and things that we had kind of seen before in the tents that were, a little more rudimentary. They've definitely figured out ways how to optimize the build process, and so seeing all of these kind of proprietary jigs for different workstations, being specifically tailored for one specific job is definitely a big improvement that should help them with constructing these vehicles.
Yeah, there's another interesting one that I saw down on the edge. This down here looks like it's going to be yet another workstation. Chrome Kiwi actually has been doing a good job of trying to figure out what all of these are for. So they've basically put together most of these jigs, and it was interesting seeing how that compares to some of what we've seen inside of the Star Factory. But it is really cool that they are constructing these out here, because it gives us an idea of kind of a look into the actual workflow inside of the factory. I think that was one thing that Elon mentioned, is that they really want each workstation to I guess flow so that there's the same amount of work being done at each workstation. So I guess let's say that it's like 2 days. So if each workstation, the vehicle or tank section, spends no longer than 2 days there, and then moves through the factory smoothly like that. So I mean, I think it takes a lot of creativity in order to develop an assembly line like that. And shout out to them for being able to create that kind of assembly line right now. I know that it's still in progress right now, but once we actually see things start to move out of that Star Factory on a consistent basis, I think we'll be able to get a lot more appreciation for the way that they constructed that building, and how much it's going to increase their throughput.
Yeah, right where your cursor is, there's actually 10 of those white kind of beam-looking structures, and there's actually 10 pedestals over to the right in that circle. So I'm guessing those are probably related. They just haven't kind of assembled it yet, which we've seen. I believe some of the previous structures have been kind of 10-sided, pieces. So looks similar to maybe something they've already built before.
Yeah, I don't recognize these, but I guess it's possible. Oh, and I see these over here too. Probably looks like it's part of that as well. Yeah, and that's one thing that I was kind of hoping, there would be a little bit more of more time spent in the Star Factory, because I feel like there's just so much to see in there. Um, but from what we did get to see, I think it's really awesome just being able to visualize how large that factory is, because when we look at it from the aerial perspective all the time, um, it's hard to really get an appreciation for it until you see what it looks like when you're actually walking through it. Um, so yeah, shout out to Tim for constantly giving us that footage like once every year, basically. So it's really great to be able to see that perspective of things. Let's see what else do we got going on at Sanchez.
Actually, I was going to point out quick, Zach. So we've got a number of sections here. We've got, I think, was it 2 more coming over on the barge?
Mm-hmm.
But over to the left, if you zoom in to the right of that white tent, it's actually a little more clear in the other photos, but there are more right there, kind of brown, rusty pieces in a line. There's actually more tower base assembly pieces here. There's actually 4 of them. So does that mean that there's potentially another section that's kind of unaccounted for that they may build?
Well, as much as I hate to admit it, that certainly is possible. I'm kind of surprised that we haven't seen any of those sections show up, if that's the case. Are those the only ones?
I had not noticed those before, but I believe those are the only ones.
Yeah, and as far as we know, the ones coming from KSC already have pedestals that they're sitting on. What were you going to say, Lawrence?
Yeah, I would agree with all that.
Yeah, like I said, in my opinion, I still do think, to some degree, depending on how you do it, that the tower is tall enough for those V3 ships. But one thing Ryan pointed out is it kind of comes down to where you're planning to lift and catch the ship from. So if you're doing it higher up on the nose, like near the nose cone of the vehicle, then the tower would most certainly have to be taller in that case. But from my perspective, I thought it makes a lot more sense to kind of lift it from lower down on the vehicle, kind of like more towards the midsection. And with that being said, you probably would not have to extend the tower. But I would say this is probably the first real sign of an additional section that hasn't been accounted for yet.
Yeah, and we can talk more about that when we get to the launch site, but we know the tower is already a little bit taller than Pad A is. But if they do indeed add another section, that's a little bit more than I guess what they're already they have built into the system.
Yeah, that would certainly be impressive to see an even taller tower. And if something like that did happen, then obviously we would expect to also see the first tower probably completely demolished, because there would really not be any way of extending the existing tower.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You wouldn't really want to kind of get yourself into a corner where you can't use a tower for specific vehicles if it does require a taller tower. So yeah, I think if it is indeed taller, then the writing's on the wall for Pad A's tower.
I agree. Got to eat crow every now and then. But we're still gonna have to wait and see. But like you're saying, it seems like the signs are pointing towards that. So what else do we have going out in Sanchez? Some weird construction going on down at the. I think there may just be like painting these tanks. These are what we believe were like the diesel storage tanks for this generator right here. There's a new facility or an extension to this facility which they've been working on for like weeks now, and it's still in the same state, and almost looks like they've kind of just paused on it. And I don't know, I'm gonna have to look back on previous images, but it looks like they've constructed new pads down here for additional equipment. This is the water treatment facility. So I'm wondering if we're going to see an extension or additional equipment added here soon. Moving on to this area, not a whole lot new here other than a lot of equipment that's kind of just been in the same area for several weeks now, if not months.
Are we calling this the junkyard yet?
Uh, it's a mix of a junkyard and a storage lot. I mean, you do have some pieces that are obviously waiting to be scrapped, and then you have stuff that's waiting to be installed. Like this right here, I'm pretty sure will probably end up at the launch complex. And yeah, I mean, yeah, that's definitely needing to be scrapped. I'm surprised that they're as behind on scrapping as they are, considering that they're not doing as much vehicle construction lately. So it's interesting how much has kind of just piled up down here.
Yeah, I'm guessing the labor just maybe shifted more towards getting the factory up and going, and maybe once that's kind of figured out, they'll jump back on the scrapping train.
Maybe the junkyard that they take all this stuff to is at capacity for how much they've been sending there. It's also interesting that these power heads for the Raptors from Booster 4 are still down here. So we also have, I guess, a full garden, at least for the ships, now that S-26 is back here. I've said this multiple times before, but I'm still hoping we see some more action out of this, because I don't think we've gotten a real explanation on the additional reinforcements that they've installed in here. Like, I don't think that was really necessary just for a static fire test. So I feel like we're going to see something else out of Ship 26 at some point. Not saying it'll fly, although that would be cool. But yeah, I don't think its days are over yet.
Yeah, given a lot of Elon's comments regarding, surviving peak heating and the results of Flight 4, I don't think there's really a purpose to fly Ship 26. I mean, regardless of, anybody's desire to see it fly, I don't think it serves a purpose to actually fly it. Now, we'll know, I guess, if they decide to take the engines off of it, whether or not it's going to fly. I believe it's going to turn into a test article. They're probably going to cut the nose off and do some testing regarding the stringers that they added to the payload section. But I think for now it's a fairly low priority item.
Sorry, I was just looking down through here because I haven't fully scrolled through all these images myself yet. Of course, we have the obligatory concrete work going on down here. Always tearing up and adding concrete all over the place. There's a lot of that going on inside of the ring yard as well too, which I guess I may as well shift over to there. So one of the big things that they're doing down here right now is adding in additional drainage, which is very weird because from my understanding and what I remember, they already had drainage in this area. So I guess they're increasing the amount that they have down here. I think we've seen some new, what do you call these? Gutters, I guess, near the actual high bay. And they've basically come across the entire area right here. You can see more down here, but I think that may have been some of the existing stuff. So it's a little weird how they've needed to do this, but I think what they're actually doing down here is raising up the concrete so they can get a better flow of water through here. I think if we look at it from another angle, that is not the best. Kind of looking for more of an overhead. Yeah, you can kind of see it here. So they've added new concrete down at this side of the building, right where the nose cones are expected to come out of the factory. So it looks like they've raised it up right here, and I think that's what they're going to do all the way across here. You can kind of see that these are raised up from what the actual level of the concrete previously was. So I think we'll see them replace all of this just so they can have better drainage through here.
Yeah, that's one of the things I noticed when in my visits to Starbase is that the grade of the concrete, everything looks flat from the air, but if you actually go and you stand over by the highway and you look through this area, it was really easy to tell before how there were slopes and bumps in different places, and that works, when you're still in your experimental stage. But once you build a giant factory with high-tech equipment, you probably don't want water building in and seeping in through the doors or at the base of the walls. So they're probably regrading this whole area to funnel a lot of the water toward the middle, which is where we do see a lot of the drainage going in. So I'm guessing water will flow away from the factory and then away from the mega bay and high bay to kind of a V in the middle that they'll probably capture it and dump it from there.
That makes sense. Yeah, I was wondering if they would go all the way up to the buildings with that, because then you would have to have kind of a slope going down towards the entrance. But I think what you're saying makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, it's no different than like a lot of driveways are meant to kind of slope away from the house. That way the water doesn't go into the garage. I think it's pretty much the same mentality with this.
Yeah, it's crazy how small the actual ring yard looks now. So looking into the actual bays right here, well, I guess before we do that, still waiting on the completion of the interior work on the parking garage. From what I can tell, they seem to still be doing stuff in the stairwells, but probably also adding lighting and drainage on the inside of this still. So not quite completed, but they're getting there. They have started to paint the exterior like a dark gray to kind of match everything else out here. I think that's pretty much required, that all of their structures have to be this gray color, and I don't know how they get away with that on part of the Star Factory, though. I'm actually surprised the whole Star Factory isn't a dark gray, because I thought that they were required to have that color for everything. But kind of continuing on, so we have ship 30 inside of the high bay, still having its tiles replaced. We don't have any good ground shots this week, but we do have some from Starship Gazer, which I wanted to share. So they have already stripped most of the ship, and they've begun installing the new tiles. And I think this guy's holding one of the new tiles right here. It's funny because they're 2 times stronger, but he's still holding it like it's a baby. But you can see here, this is a good shot showing the ablative material that they're adding on top of it. Below the tiles. So this is basically replacing the KO wool mesh that was down here. And so you can see that it's basically a mat that goes down. It looks similar to like a rubber mat, but I think we actually had some clues on what material this was. I can't remember the name of it, though. Do you happen to know, Ryan?
Yeah, I believe there were some job postings posted for SpaceX, and I believe they may have used this material before, but it's called Pyron. But it's essentially an ablative material, and if you do some research on the internet, you can get some comparisons between different materials and how it reacts when exposed to heat. But overall, it looks like it's an ablative material, as Elon has kind of hinted to, and they're kind of using this as a second layer of defense in case some of the tiles do fall off. So it shows up in these rolls, and it's not clear, I guess, if the holes are pre-punched in maybe some of the sections or not, but at least on the nose cone, it looks like they're basically taking like a hole punch, and they're punching like a quarter-sized hole out of the material, and then they throw it over the top of the pins. The pins actually poke through, so it's essentially the same it's the same sort of stack up as they had before, only instead of having the white material, they now have this this black material.
It's tough to tell if they've been applying this everywhere, or like so far I've only seen it on the nose cone.
I believe it is on the body. It's on the nose cone. They're only doing certain regions with it, and if you go back to the aerial photo, you can actually see one of the things that they've done just in the past day or so is it looks like they've removed the wool from the flap. So you can actually see the white wool kind of on that wraps around the leeward side up there that they haven't touched yet. Then you can see the black pyron to the right of it, more towards the top of the image. That's the material that we were just looking at on the nose cone. And previously they had the white wool on the flap surface, but they have removed it. I believe they did that actually just before this flyover, or maybe the day before. So you can actually see the bare metal there on the flap, but towards the bottom there's a discoloration, but it's unclear if that is actually the pyron or not.
You're talking about down here?
Well, actually, on the aft flap, it looks like they've maybe removed it on that as well. But the forward flap, they've removed the wool from the faces of the flap there. So,
yeah, I think it would make sense to also see that ablative material on here. I mean, I think the good news about this is that it allows them to essentially lose a few tiles without it burning through the stainless steel. It doesn't completely eliminate rapid reusability, but I mean, in that situation, of course, it would probably require some refurbishment. But I think that's better than losing a ship. So, ideally, your tiles are going to remain attached and you don't really have to worry about it. But this is kind of more like a fail-safe in case something happens to go wrong and one of them falls off. So yeah, I mean, I think they still have ways to go with the design of this, and this is just really the first true revision that we've ever seen of these tiles. So yeah, still great progress, and it's also crazy just how fast they're moving with this. I think we probably still have several weeks, if not over a month, to go before they finish that, though.
the interesting thing with the tiles is that they are seemingly keeping the glued tiles. A majority of the glued tiles are remaining as of now, and they're just kind of putting this pyron where the pinned tiles are, and then they're tiling over the top of that. So they did completely removed the nose cone tiles, so it's likely that they want to change something up there, which is interesting that they're leaving the other glued tiles, but they've removed those, so it might not be related to the gluing, although it's possible that area sees just heating temperatures that were higher than what they were expecting, so they may thicken the tile or do something else. But yeah, it's interesting. You can kind of tell where the areas are that they are a little concerned with, and I think the main deal with this pyron is they're trying to ensure that they can get the ship through the reentry heating so that they can then navigate to their targeted splashdown. The sooner they can get that targeted splashdown figured out, the sooner they can actually bring these ships back closer to like a desired inspection point where maybe they'll catch them, maybe they'll land them on legs. But once they can actually inspect the heat tiles, up close in person, that's going to tell them a whole bunch more information about where they need to optimize the design versus what they can just get with sensor data that they can't actually see.
Agreed. I'm sure we have some questions on this. Maybe we should take a chance to address some of those.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we definitely have a couple of questions. So I want to start out by thanking Yazada for a $10 super chat and just saying Zach and Ryan, all-star lineup.
Thank you. Definitely appreciate that.
Also got I believe it's an Australian $2 super chat from Pete 2.0 again. Awesome shots at RGV. And Cindy, another $2 super chat. Thanks for the content. All right, and as far as questions go, is the Pyron underneath the stick-on tiles? How does that work with sticking on the tiles?
Yeah, it seems as though wherever they are gluing tiles, they're not actually putting the Pyron, at least yet. So we'll have to kind of wait and see if they come up with a solution for that. This material does seem relatively rigid. They're having to actually hold it on the vehicle by using the pins. You can see actually just to the left of Zach's cursor, there's what kind of looks like a U-channel piece of metal. These are the pieces of metal that are actually embedded inside the tiles. That when they push them on, the pins actually clip into those pieces of metal, and they're just using these to kind of hold the material against the body until they can put all the tiles on. So this material isn't actually being glued to the surface of the stainless steel. Not sure if that's even a possibility, but yeah, it does pose a little bit of a question of when they go to glue the tiles, are they going to put this underneath glued tiles and have this glued to the metal surface and then have the tiles glued to this? That kind of opens up the door for a lot of additional failure points. So we'll have to wait and see what they do with some of those glued tiles.
Yeah, that would be a difficult to use this with those, because you'd have to glue this down and then glue the tiles on top of this, and I imagine that's not ideal.
I think aspirationally, they'd probably like to move away from using the glue if they can. And I think they certainly can move that way, where some of the tiles they currently are gluing, they can convert to pinned connections, which we've already seen some of that with the V2 hardware as it's been moved around the site. It does appear like they're gearing up to try and pin more of the tiles and have less glued tiles. So I think aspirationally that's kind of the direction they're trying to go.
Yeah, and shout out to Starship Gazer for these awesome shots. Make sure, if y'all haven't already, to follow him on Twitter, and also support him on Patreon. He's out there pretty much every day. Those of you who are on his Discord server probably have a lot of access to some really awesome images that he doesn't normally post all of them on X, but there's some really good shots. Like I said, he's out there pretty much every day. So shout out to him for these awesome images. And Lawrence, did we have more questions related to that same topic?
No, we do have other Sanchez and Star Factory questions.
Cool.
So one of the questions, in fact, we have two from Brian Illenberg. First one is, aren't the Mega Bay cranes only capable of lifting 185 tons, thus placing a upper limit of 185 tons for the takeage and 250 tons for a whole booster?
Yes and no. So I believe they're actually 150-ton cranes, and the one in the high bay I think is 180. I could have that backwards, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. And even though they do have that limit, they can also tandem lift. So that would increase their limit up to 300.
Yeah, I believe they'll lift like some of the pre-sections with one crane, but then when they actually lift like a whole booster onto like a transport stand, they do a dual lift where they hook both cranes up to it. So that allows them to have that capacity to lift, the structure and all the engines, because the engines are quite heavy in comparison.
Agreed. And the next question from Brian is regarding part one of the EDA interview. And he's saying the liquid methane header tank looks like it will use a common dome. Wouldn't this allow them to extend the tanks into the payload bay while also retaining volume?
that's a little tough for me to speak on. I know that Jax and Nick from the Ring Watchers are currently working on an article related to that. So um, maybe I'll let them explain it, but I can at least show a screenshot of what that looks like. So um, yeah, this is from Tim's video that released this morning, and I think this is what he's referring to as the common dome, but I don't think that's what it really is. I think it's two separate tanks. So this the LOX tank is not present here right now.
Agreed.
But be on the lookout from that article from the Ring Watchers. I'm sure it'll probably be out sometime within the next week. Oops.
All right, Ed. We have just a couple of more questions. From John T. Have we seen any evidence of the launch mount build here in Starbase?
No, not yet. We don't really know what to expect from the launch mount. Right now, all we have is tower sections, and then soon we'll have chopsticks. But as far as launch mount, that's a mystery. We don't know what it's going to look like. I mean, for all we know, it could already be under construction at the Hangar M, or is it Hangar M facility. So it could be under construction right now, and will later be moved here. But as far as right now, like we really don't know. I think if they want to build it inside of a hangar instead of build it outside like they did last time, then it makes sense to construct it in that Hangar M facility, because this ground fabrication building is not large enough for that. I'm sure they could potentially fit it through the doors, maybe, but there wouldn't be very much space inside to actually get around it and work. There's a bridge crane, so that would be helpful, but I don't think that's what they intend to use this building for. So with that said, that's one of those things that's a mystery item, and I think it kind of leads to a lot of speculation, the fact that we haven't seen it, related to whether or not this will start off as a catch-only tower, which I don't think there's any possibility of that happening. But I think that is one of the biggest things that leads to that speculation, because of the fact that we just haven't seen the launch mount yet. But given how long it took to build the first one, I would have to imagine that they've already started on the second one.
Agreed. And another question about Sanchez is, has the tower section load spreader and column adapters been spotted?
So the column adapters were here a solid year before the tower sections came, if I remember correctly. So they've always been here. I don't know where they are right now, but that was one of the first indications that we had that this was going to happen. I think I posted about it about a year ago when we first spotted those. I don't know where they are, though.
Would those be the feet that are now on the top of the tower base columns?
Yes, actually, yeah. I'll go and show that really quick. My pictures got out of order. I'm not really sure what's going on there. Oh, no, it's not. I thought I did see them on here because I thought they used them to lift these, but no, I don't see them here.
Okay.
They're rectangular adapters that go across the top. Cool. Any more Sanchez questions, or ring yard as well?
For the Sanchez and the ring yard, I think we're done. We got a couple of more Star Factory questions, though.
Cool. I don't know what's happening with my images here. I may have to close out of some of these and reopen it. Yeah. Well, that's a new one. Yeah, bring up some Star Factory. I'm going to try and close out of these ones working for me.
Yeah, while you're doing that, I want to also give thanks to Miss Jax for gifting a membership, and I believe it's Toby Woby for becoming a member.
Cool. All right. So I got those back up there. It's been giving me a lot of troubles over the last few months, but hopefully I'll get that resolved soon. Before we answer those Star Factory questions, though, really quick, I did want to mention the construction going on the inside of the Mega Bay, Mega Bay 2, which it looks like they made a lot of progress on, but there's still a lot more to come. So there's all this framework down here, and you can see the grading for the walkways. So they're adding some platforms along the backside of the Mega Bay. So it's essentially like permanent scaffolding. So that was one thing I was also hoping we were going to get a view of on the inside of Mega Bay 2, but they didn't go inside that building, probably just because it's pretty much just a construction zone right now. So there was not really much worth showing inside of there. But yeah, let's address those Star Factory questions.
From
This is
Six
a
String.
long week. Sorry about that. I just realized I opened up the previous week's images. Like, it's way too sunny out there. Okay, go ahead.
All right. So from Six String Simpleton, basically it's more of a statement regarding Star Factory, saying that not the same amount of work, but the same amount of time at each station. When you find the bottleneck in the process, you'll delegate other parts to different stations.
Yeah, that can be done, assuming that it's flexible enough that they can do that. Yeah, that overall that's going to keep the flow of parts through the factory high, which is exactly what they want.
Agreed. And from Jimmy Mack, does the Star Factory just butt up against Mega Bay 2, or are there openings between the two?
I don't think we know if there's actually like an opening or a door. I imagine at the very least there probably will be like a human door, but I don't think it'll necessarily be big enough in order to actually take like a full section through that area. I imagine they'll probably still bring it out and then go in. Although who knows, maybe the environment cleanliness is higher for Mega Bay 2. They may be able to take a section in there, but I'm not going to hold my breath on that. I think that's purely just going to be for like workers to walk from one building to another.
Agreed. And want to thank a couple of more people. We have Pete 2.0 back again with the looks like $5 Australian RGV fuel trade. Get on board. And we also have Yazada with $5. Keep Mauricio in the air.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for the donations. We really appreciate that. It definitely helps with the weekly flyovers. It's really expensive getting up there, so appreciate everybody who's been supporting the channel for this long. Definitely appreciate all of you very much. So moving on, we do have the Star Factory. Not a ton to see here since the exterior of the building is mostly completed. So they have been still working on drainage on the backside over here. And as most of you know, there was a pretty good storm this week, which raised the tide level, and it kind of like flooded inland. I don't think all of this is like just runoff, but I think most of it was the actual tide coming up. So I think they actually finally put the drainage system to the test, which I'm a little confused on. I've been trying to find where it actually drains to. So they do have some runoff from here, but I'm expecting a lot more than that. I can't remember where this actually drains to, but there are tons of drains along the actual side of the building. So basically the entire roof drains from this side down to the front, or the well, I guess, what is this, the north side of the building? Um, and yeah, so tons of drainage coming off this building, but haven't been able to actually see where it goes. But they still got some more work going on back here. There's another facility that they're adding back here, which seems to be mostly completed, and I think they're preparing for another one right here as well too. Haven't actually been able to figure out what these are yet, but yeah, just some additional construction work going on there. On the front side of the building, we're still waiting for them to start putting columns down over here for this extension. This is a very odd extension as well. It basically just lengthens just this part of the building right here, and I think that may just be like the first step before they're able to move over into this area right here. And I don't think we know when that court case is expected to be settled. Last I heard, it was August. But I think we've been hearing extensions to that for like a year now. So um, tough to say when that's actually going to happen. But right now, it does look like it's going to extend almost to the edge of the office building. It's tough to say whether or not they'll actually join together. I don't think that will be the case based on the way that this is kind of formed right now. But they'll definitely be near touching.
Yeah, I think they'll probably connect them just because it'll allow them, workers can work basically. They can walk from one end of the site to the other without going outside. I imagine they'll have some sort of like a interior corridor. This area could also be, an extension of office space. We don't really know, I guess. At the very least, the curvature of the wall is going to match at least the current part of the office building that they have constructed. So at least from the highway, it's probably going to be one smooth sweep from the office building all the way to the far end of the factory. I think you can actually see that on some of the more aerial images, the top down. You can actually see how that shape would actually work. But I think, yeah, they're going to connect them here. May have been a little bit of an afterthought, but I do think they're going to connect them.
I feel like this entire building is an afterthought.
Yeah, one thing that was pointed out last night is the way that new office building is shaped. It will kind of offset the extension in front of the mega bays, so it'll kind of be symmetrical that way, where it'll look with that angled offset.
Yeah. Yeah, this kind of reminds me in some ways of the Tesla Gigafactory, with the way that they're constantly extending that. Obviously, they're kind of limited here with how much space they have, but they're definitely maximizing the entire surface area of this production site for this factory. So this week, it looks like they've also poured the second level concrete for this building. You can see it's still wet down here. They're kind of putting their final touches on that. So they still have 2-3 levels left to do. Is this the roof up here? Actually, I don't think this is the roof. This almost looks like a large balcony.
Yeah, it could be like some sort of rooftop patio.
Yeah, that's what I meant, patio. But yeah, they're moving relatively slow on this building, actually. They're still haven't done much on this side over here other than the actual framework of the building. But yeah, still making progress. It doesn't seem like they're in a huge rush with this like they are with most things on site. But it'll be cool to see this once it's finished. Moving on, I don't think we have much else to really discuss with the Star Factory, and not much to talk about at the village either. Hold on, I'm going to have to...
All right, before we move on to what everybody's waiting for, I do have a couple of more questions for the Star Factory.
Cool.
One is regarding ships and boosters. Do you think Raptor 3 will bring back LOX side heat exchangers? That's from DS.
Probably not. I think they may have their solution for that right now, and they're not thinking that it's necessary to add that or re-add it if it was ever there. I don't know. I've been thinking about this a lot. I'm currently working on an episode that mentions a lot of this stuff and kind of gets deep into how that ice formation actually occurs. Elon did a good job of kind of touching on that during the tour with Tim. But I still think it's worth going into a little deeper explanation because it does raise a lot of questions, as was just asked. I think Tim had some questions on it as well too that went unanswered. I was hoping that he was going to get some answers, but I think we kind of understand it well enough now to really piece most of it together. But yeah, as far as replacing the post combustion autogenous gas with gas expanded from a heat exchanger, I don't know. I don't think that we'll see that. And Elon didn't really seem he kind of shrugged that off as well too. So I don't think that that's something that we'll see.
Yeah, I think that eats into a little bit of the engine efficiency, which I think the mentality is they can design around the ice issues with the benefit of higher efficiency.
Agreed. And the last question I really have, well, there's two, both from Six String Simpleton. First one, how much pressure is applied to each pin during reentry?
I'm guessing you're talking about the tiles.
Yeah, I believe so.
Probably. Yeah. I think a common misconception is that when they are re-entering the atmosphere, there's actually a ton of pressure on the vehicle, and that's actually not exactly the case. It's when they're up higher, say 68 kilometers, there's really not a lot of force on the flaps. I mean, the atmosphere is relatively thin. It's just a matter of they're going so fast it can't move out of the way quick enough, which is why it produces the plasma. It's not until they get much lower, they have their call outs in the live stream about the maximum, dynamic pressure. It's not until they get much lower that the tiles start feeling more force. But then again, there's also a little bit of like a boundary layer that's formed. So it's questionable about how much, air pressure the tiles actually see. I would say that, closer to the entry dynamic, maximum pressure is probably where the biggest concerns are. And I don't think we'll ever know, what sort of forces those tiles actually see.
Agreed. And another question from Six String Simpleton. Why is Mega Bay 2 attached to the lowest section of Star Factory? Shouldn't sections stacked in the factory come out the high side into the Mega Bay?
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on that a little bit. We don't really expect sections to come through the side of this building because that kind of takes away one of the workstations that are in here if that happens. So yeah, more than likely they'll come out of any of these doors down here and into that building. So not through the sidewall.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned there, Zach, was something I thought of earlier after I gave my first answer to that question, which is, it's going to take away a workstation if they bring sections in through the side there. If you think about the layout, they've basically got 3 workstations across the back and then 1 on each side of the door. And if you are going to bring sections in there, you're going to lose, one of your spots. So I think at that point they'd rather just use the door because it already exists, and they can keep a workstation over in that corner.
Agreed. And a question from Mini Rocketry. Sorry about that, phone ringing. Wasn't there some sort of drainage at the end of San Martin Boulevard?
Yes. So, 1 second. Trying to get a good shot of that. This one's San Martin, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the drainage is down here. I think that they just recently completed this because they've poured the concrete for this street right here. They initially had drainage going along the sides. I think this side right here, actually both sides, and so that flows down to here. But the drainage for the actual building itself is not connected to that, as far as I know. Cool. Any other questions, or shall we move to the launch site? All right. I guess that means we're going to the launch site. Cool. So we're going to go ahead and start over with the orbital pad, since that is the less exciting area right now, I would say. Like to save the best for last. But this brings us back into talking about booster 14.1, which is now at the launch site. So before we get into that, I'm sure this may have been mentioned on previous or last week or the week before, but they did replace all of the hold down clamps on the or the not the arms, just the clamps on top of the load arms here. So as far as I know they've replaced 11 of them. I'm not sure if they did all 20, but by the looks of the way they're covered up, I think they probably did all 20 of them. This thing looks kind of greasy, doesn't it?
Yeah, you can tell, I guess, where it gets a little scarred from the pad avoidance, slight pitch over that they do on liftoff. But it does look like it's holding up pretty good, even considering the number of flights that it's seen.
Yeah, and one good thing that hasn't happened this time around is that they have not had to replace the cryo hoses. So that's really awesome. Having to do that every single time, I imagine was kind of a pain, and it seems like they may have solved that issue. So that's really great to see. And I think, obviously there's certain things that necessarily can't necessarily be fixed with this design, like with the actual hold down clamps. So that is probably something that we'll see change on the next launch mount. I'll maybe go into that more next week, once part 2 of Tim's episode has come out. I don't want to go too deep into it now, though. But yeah, so we have booster 14.1, which, as I mentioned earlier, was transported from the launch site, from the Massey's test site to the launch site. And just a quick glance on Lab Padre's live stream, and where did it go? That's really interesting. Give me a second here. I think there we go. Wow. So looking at this, you can see that booster 14.1 is up here on the launch mount. And I don't know. This is interesting. There were a few different theories about exactly what's going to go down here, and I think I'll let Ryan touch on that. But just to mention one thing, so a lot of people were surprised to see this up here, but if you do remember, it was transported on a booster transport stand, and I had a close up of that. Maybe, yeah. So it's on a booster transport stand, and it does have. Maybe this one's more clear. So this aft section, I believe, is similar to the booster aft section, just with those clamp positions right here. So that's what allows it to sit on top of the launch mount. One other thing to notice is the pipe inlet right here, which can either be used for cryoliquids or potentially water. So that's one important thing to consider with this vehicle, what they're going to do when they test it. But Ryan did have some ideas on this. I'm not sure if your opinion has changed yet, because I don't think we were expecting it to go straight onto the launch mount, but I'll let you kind of speak on this, Ryan.
Yeah, so over the past week or so, we've seen some testing of the landing rails And we know that they move up and down. We've seen them do it. And one of the initial thoughts I had was, since they were testing the load points on 14.1, that they might bring it out and kind of continue with that regime, using it to actually test the landing rails here on the arms. It's not occurring, I guess, how I was initially imagining it might, and I think my opinion is changed a little bit with what they may actually be trying to test here. By putting it on the launch mount, they could bring the arms over like it is here, and lift up and compressively test the dampers and the pistons on the landing rails. I'm not entirely sure what that goes to show. For data, it's not exactly the correct forces, although they may be able to get away with taking some shortcuts in some manners to try and produce the results that they want. Potentially by holding the bottom of the booster, they can pull up with the arms and kind of simulate as if the 14.1 was heavier than it actually is. That's just a speculation, of course, but I think they may also take this opportunity to test the arms closing, because as we know, the arms need to be open when the booster comes back, and then they'll start closing. I believe Elon has said they'll start closing around the methane tank as the booster is coming back down. And we've known in the past they've had some issues with getting the arms to stop on a dime, just because of the inertia and the mass that they have. It's pretty hard to kind of slow down these heavy arms as they're swinging. So I think they may be wanting to test that with an article that essentially has maybe done its job already, that they can damage if need be. They don't really have to worry about it. I think the biggest issue here is that they run the risk of smacking the arm with the landing rail into the stringers on the side of the vehicle. So that would obviously probably cause some damage if they aren't calibrated correctly and they smack it pretty hard. So I think there may be an element of testing some calibrations going on here, just to verify that the arms are able to close and stop where they want them to. And we may see some testing with the landing rails. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to kind of be watching the live streams and see what they do here over the next couple of days. And I think we had an early indication they were going to do something with the launch mount because they took down all the scaffolding that they had up there. So this isn't exactly how I thought they might do it. I thought they might put it over here later on after they'd done some other testing, but it seems like they're just taking a little bit of a different route with what they want to do.
Yeah, and I think the crane that they are using, Grover, is a little bit limited on how high they for testing on the chopsticks. I guess it's high enough right now if they did it at this height, but yeah, I've always thought that was interesting. Just the crane of choice kind of threw things off immediately. I have heard some people suggest that the booster would not necessarily fall onto the landing rails, but that the chopsticks will raise up to meet it because it'll already be hovering. What do you think about that, Ryan? Because I don't know. From what we've seen so far in SpaceX's official renders or animations, they do not show that happening. And so sometimes they don't have correct things in those animations, but I think that's a pretty good indication of how they plan to do it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a misconception in terms of the benefit that hovering has. When you're talking about a hover, you're essentially saying that your vertical velocity is 0, and when you do that, it's a little bit harder to control the vehicle. You kind of wobble back and forth, and that sort of precision required to land on these rails doesn't bode well if you're kind of wobbling back and forth. I mean, you can calibrate it pretty closely, but you're still going to have a little bit of wobble from a control standpoint. And so I don't think hovering is really what they want to do. If anything, it's a very slow descent. They're going to come down pretty quickly. That way the inertia of the vehicle keeps it vertical. It's essentially like riding a bike and letting go of the handlebars and it still goes straight, or even a motorcycle, because there's the rotational inertia, going in one direction. The vehicle kind of continues going in that direction. That's the benefit I think that they're going to try and utilize here, where they're going to square in the position, they're going to come down vertically, and there's not really going to be a hover. It's going to slow to a stop at a specific point as the arms, come in to meet the vehicle. And yeah, I think a hover is bad. I mean, this is the most hovering that they'll do here at the end, in my opinion. And that I really don't consider that a hover. That's more of just a slowing to a stopping point.
It's a brief hover, and then it looks like it does drop.
I believe they're trying to indicate the landing rail compressing at that last little bit there.
Think so?
Yeah,
Yeah, because it doesn't move. The landing rail doesn't move. Yeah, good point. That but I mean, that's a pretty good height, even considering what you're saying. Yeah, I mean it's less than a second or two of, I guess, what you could consider a hover.
it's kind of the key thing. I think some people may have this idea in mind that it's going to hover, then the arms are going to go from a wide open angle and move in, and then it's going to contact. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to happen very similar to what's pictured here, in the sense that the arms
Right.
start closing as it's coming down.
Yeah. Do you think? I mean, there's not a ton of space for these to move down. I guess they can easily move below low enough so that they can actually lift the landing rails. Do you think that would test the same thing by lifting it up with landing rails deployed and letting it? I guess the drawworks would be the one doing the compressing, not the actual weight of the vehicle.
If the pistons for the landing rails work how I imagine they do, it's possible that they could do that, but they would have to change a little bit of what's going on in order to actually achieve that. And maybe we'll go into more detail about that at a later point. But there's definitely some different things that they could test. Right now I'm struggling to envision the exact benefit of some of the tests with the way they currently have things configured.
Yeah. Again, I would say the moment they put it on the launch mount, that kind of threw things off a lot.
I will
Cool.
say I did actually. There was a comment on one of my posts on X this morning that basically stated that, well, it's in relation to one of the other renderings I posted, where the launch mount clamps are they're 18 degrees apart. And based on my models with the booster and the arms, it looks like they have plus or minus about 18 degrees of roll that they could be off and still catch the booster. So I wonder if there's an element where they're going to, put the booster or put, 14.1 on the mount, and then they lift it up with the rails and they rotate it 18 degrees with the pusher arms and then set it back down on the launch mount. It's a possibility, but not sure. We'll have to see what they do.
Yeah, agreed. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, we actually have several questions regarding this subject, if you don't mind me jumping in with them.
Let's do it.
All right. So the first one was from Six String Simpleton. Would there be a drop test for the arms, or would a lift suffice? And would they fill 14.1 to simulate an empty booster?
I think they could, if they're going to do anything, they'd probably fill it with water. It'd be much safer to do that than to, fill it with any cryogenic propellant or anything like that. As far as a drop test goes, I don't think they would drop it in the sense of lifting it up with the crane and then cutting the line, because it wouldn't exactly simulate what would happen in reality, where the booster's kind of on a slower controlled descent. If you just let go of the test article and let it fall, obviously it's going to, fall at the rate of gravity is going to accelerate it. So it wouldn't exactly be a an apt comparison. I think at the very least, if they were to do something like that, they would just have the crane lower it at some expected velocity.
Yeah, I was looking for. I found I was asking somebody, a crane expert, in my Discord server about this um, yesterday, just in relation to the possibility of damaging the crane in the process of doing this. Um, and so he said that a legit drop would not happen, as it would be detrimental to the crane. The block would likely go over the top and recoil and pull the jib over backwards, which would have a chance at pulling the boom over backwards. Lowering the booster at what would be full speed is limited to the speed of the drum. And so the max speed for that crane is 2 meters per second. Um, so yeah, there's also like issues with the actual deflection of the boom. So it's kind of, once you release that kind of weight from it, it would deflect backwards, and that would also have an effect on potential damage to it. So you know, this is one of the things, is that like cranes go through uh, crazy events throughout their life, and they have to be able to survive like dropping loads. That does happen. So I mean, it's not something that you want to do intentionally, but they are designed to be able to survive that kind of stuff. But I guess the question just comes down to whether or not they would be willing to do something like that. um, you know
It really comes down to you don't want to have a sudden unloading of the mass. If anything, you'd want to slow it, from its from having load on the crane to not having the load.
Right.
Agreed. Next question is from Cosmic. Which side of the OLM will they try a catch, or right over the OLM?
So this has been pretty debated, I think. I think we can rule out one side pretty easily, which is the side that the ship QD rotates towards. There is no room on that side to actually perform the booster catch, even with the ship QD rotated out of the way. I've looked at it on my models, and there really isn't room, to do it. Initially, some of the simulations that I think Elon posted many years ago showed a catch on the side of the tower that the arms are currently pointing, which is, I call that the stacking location, or sometimes the home position. That is
Was that
was
the first animation they ever showed of it?
um, My first animation showed, yeah, the OFT animation shows it in that location. There were a couple of
Okay.
simulations that Elon posted on X, it was Twitter at the time, many years ago, showing that 29 engine booster coming in and being caught on that side of the tower. And I think they may be deciding against catching it in that location now, just because there's not really a reason to at this point, because they know that there's stuff down there that could be damaged if the booster misses. And at this point, this latest animation from SpaceX shows them catching directly over the launch mount. And I'll admit at first I was kind of skeptical of this, but I believe they actually are going to do this, and we've seen that actually with the last flight where the arms did do some motions. They didn't exactly rehearse a catch, but they did end up over the top of the launch mount, and the water deluge system turned on. So I think it's highly likely that they're going to catch over the top of the launch mount. I think they've kind of proved that it's robust enough that if it can take liftoff, all of the heat and the force at liftoff, that it can probably handle, if a booster slowly crashes into it.
Right. I mean, one of the things to consider, I guess, as well is, let's see if I have a better angle of it. So when you look at the actual like concrete down here, so there's some cryo lines that run along this area and then up to the tower. So that's one thing I've always been worried about, is the possibility of, if you miss the catch, it basically falling onto this concrete and breaking through that culvert. So with that said, the damage that could result from that is, well, it could go all the way back to the tank farm potentially. I mean, ideally these valves are going to be closed, but you don't really know what's going to happen if a vehicle breaks through that concrete and crushes the actual propellant distribution lines. So with that said, it may, I mean, it may be better to do it over the launch mount, even though obviously damaging the launch mount is going to suck too. But it's better than damaging the stuff that's underground, which also goes into the tower. So like if you had some sort of explosion, you could, I mean, they don't completely purge out all those lines. So it is possible that you could cause internal damage to the tower by landing on that. So I think that may be a good reason to do it over the launch mount. But yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I've always thought was interesting, would be interesting. So they do have a fire suppression system on the bottom of this table. So, if the booster happened to come in and was still on fire or something, you could potentially lower it down in there into that fire suppression system. For some reason, I doubt that they've ever really considered that, but it would be an option, I guess.
I think
But
there's
yeah,
maybe also an element of trying to alleviate variables on this first catch that if they point the arms, over the launch mount, they're basically pointing out towards the direction that the rocket went. So as it's coming back, it's basically, parallel. So
right,
essentially, if they target a position, they really only need to correct their roll axis and then just come straight down, and they can pretty much, I don't want to say ensure a catch, but like 90, plus percent, just alleviate another variable from, from possibly being off a little bit. So it's maybe a little bit easier just to try and get it to work the first time.
right.
But we do
Guaranteed
know the
impact.
next tower is rotated, so it's it might be a little interesting, I guess, how they're gonna handle the catches on pad B.
Yeah, I do want to get to that over here in a second. One thing that I did want to mention first, which I was looking for other images, but I must have closed out of them, and I'm not going to reopen them. But the tank farm, they've been making more progress with getting all of these shells removed. So as of this image, they had taken the or most of the shell off of GSE 3, which is a LOX tank. All of these remaining were LOX tanks. And so as of right now, they've already finished chopping that down, and they've also removed this one. So before with these, they took off the shell and then took the tank off from the inside, and then also took off the lower part of the shell. But right now, it seems like they're, I would say this crane isn't worried about leaving to do something else. It's kind of committed to this right now. So they're just doing it in an order that makes more sense, not having to take off the load spreader and change it out. So I think we'll see them actually remove all 3 shells and then move on to the actual tanks after that.
Yeah, I think it's just an optimization because every time they have to switch a load spreader, that adds time to, the process. So if they can just, quickly, grab all of the shells at one time using the same spreader, it probably saves time in the end.
Yeah,
Agreed.
they did briefly use this crane to help with assembling the superstructure of the CC 8800, which we're going to see here in a second. But before we do that, I just realized I do need the other image.
And real quick, while you're looking for that, Tony, maybe burn off any remaining fuel at below force to hover once caught.
Um,
I don't think they would do that necessarily. Are they saying with the like they keep the engines burning to burn off fuel, or they would just vent it?
Yeah, I believe keep the engines running and do the hover to burn off the fuel.
Yeah, I'm not
Probably
sure
not a good
about
idea.
that. Yeah, relatively speaking, it's going to be quite empty. The amount of propellant that'll be left over, venting that overboard is not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. It might. Who knows? They may be able to recover some of it if they put it back on the launch mount, but I have a feeling that if there is, ice and stuff inside, that they may not want to actually detank with the booster QD, so that they may just do something very similar to what they did with um, SN15, where they just kind of let it boil off and vent.
Yeah, they do have the ability to dump the tanks as well too. There's a basically a purge on the bottom of the booster, which you can basically dump out from the bottom. So let's
I believe we have seen them actually use that in action one time. I
during
believe,
the booster 7 explosion.
yeah, I believe that was when we saw that happen.
There's no remaining footage of that. It's one of the few things that I do not have recorded, which is when they did that liquid oxygen dump and caught something on fire at the launch site. I think it was a generator. Yeah. I do have a picture of this really quick just so I can show it, hopefully. Searching through my whole archive right here right now. Okay, well, maybe not. I'll search for that here in the background, but let's see. In the meantime, I guess Ryan, maybe you can go into this. Where did it go? That fourth tank, or the liquid oxygen tank that they delivered.
Yeah, so here on the end of the tank row, they've added another one of the horizontal tanks. Like the last flyover we saw, I believe they had dug out the areas, but they hadn't maybe filled them with concrete. Not entirely sure on that yet, but we can see they've actually delivered another tank, and they have placed it here. So this is new since the last flight, and there's room for one more of these horizontal tanks to be placed right next to it, and presume that they would plumb these in with the rest, which I believe we kind of had an indication that they were going to be adding a couple more tanks, just because there was another one of those pipe stands, which you can see just to the top of that horizontal tank that had been previously placed. So that was a good indication that they were going to extend some of these pipes over onto that stand. So not sure if this one will be plumbed in for the next flight or not. It's clear that they have enough capacity for a flight. So this may just be for some additional margin, just in case they need that. So 2 more
Yeah.
tanks of the locks.
One thing they did mention, and I think I've said this before too, it's always been weird to me how the methane storage almost seems to be equal, if not larger, than the liquid oxygen storage. It's kind of tough to. I haven't looked at the volumes of these, but you have these 2 tanks over here plus the 6 right here. One thing that they did mention during the official broadcast was that if they had to detank the vehicle, that would require a 2-day reset in order to due to limitations with liquid oxygen and water storage. I think they said specifically like if there was an abort within the last 15 seconds or something like that. So essentially, that I guess we probably already expected that they only had enough water for a full launch attempt. So given that this is like programmed, a static fire is different than a launch. So this is probably for launch conditions programmed for like, I don't know, let's say 15 to 20 seconds versus during static fire operations, it's probably only like 10 seconds. So you could have enough water for multiple static fires, but not for multiple launch attempts. So the limitation for doing a 1-day reset is the water and liquid oxygen. So having these additional tanks should allow them to cut down some of that time. If they somehow were able to get a pipeline of water flowing over to this launch site to refill these tanks, then that would be the last remaining thing that would probably prevent them from being able to actually do a 1-day reset. But so far, we haven't seen any. I think we've only seen one scrub out of all 4 of the first launches, so that's pretty impressive. And I think it's bound to happen in the future, though, for various reasons. So having this additional storage would contribute to that. But beyond that, you're also going to have a second launch site soon, which these, as far as what we've been told by SpaceX, is that they will use this same tank farm to feed both towers. So I think that additional storage is helpful for that as well, too. But I did find that image I was looking for, so I'll show that really quick. So this is the bottom of Booster 7, I think. Yeah, this is Booster 7. And you can see these 2 valves right here. So we've never fully confirmed this, but the only thing that really makes sense would be liquid oxygen dump right here. There may be, one of them may be a methane dump, although, dumping them right next to each other is kind of sketchy. But we have seen this in action, so pretty sure this is where it was coming from. But with that said, that could be a way of at least detanking the liquid oxygen tank quickly. Would just be to dump everything out, and then you kind of reduce some of the explosive potential of the vehicle once you do that. So I doubt they would do it before coming to a rest. It would probably be something you do after, just quickly safe the vehicle in that way. But yeah, that's one option. I have so many windows open, it's not even funny now. All right, so let's go ahead and move over to Orbital Pad B, where we have a super crane in progress of getting set up. Let's take a look at it from another angle. This is the Saren's CC 8800, and it's kind of difficult to tell right now. Like, this doesn't look as large as the LR 11350 did.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Basically, right now, I believe they're in the shorter lifting configuration for the lower segments, but this crane should get bigger. That double wide boom is the boom buster section, and I believe it is currently only configured for 4 of the 5 total sections at this time.
Well, even the main superstructure of the crane looks smaller. Maybe that's just because it doesn't have the suspended counterweight tray yet, but it does look smaller than the other one. So you were mentioning that they have additional sections for this. So that is one question that I kind of brought up a few weeks ago, was how they were going to reconfigure, not necessarily how, but the fact that they needed to, and whether or not this is something that will get in the way of launch operations. So having this crane on site is like kind of sketchy, especially when you're going to do your first landing attempt. So the question is whether or not the owner of this crane would want for this thing to be on site, given that they're going to do that kind of operation. I mean, having it here during a launch is one thing, but with the possibility of an explosion during landing, I think that's a completely different thing that you have to be concerned about. So, the question is whether or not there would be a pause to launch operations because of this crane being here. So right now, in its current configuration, it does look like it can lay down behind in the shadow of the tower. So if we look at a different angle of this, it's basically within that shadow of the tower. So it is in a protected position, and somehow actually there's also room for the other crane to lay down back here as well too if they wanted to leave both of them out here. So it's not impossible that they wouldn't have to cause any delays, but this thing is going to get bigger, and I suppose it has room to move back. But you can see that there's an additional what did you call this section of it again? I keep wanting to call it power boom.
Yeah, for the Saren's configuration, it's the boom booster.
Okay. Yeah, so this is are these 6-meter sections or 12? These are 12, right?
I believe so, because the total length when it's fully configured is 72 meters for the boom booster.
With this configuration.
Right. Yeah, just the boom booster, the double wide section, will be 72 meters total when it's fully configured.
So this is what, 5, 6 sections of 12 right here, and then there's this additional.
Yes.
So there's one additional section for that, and then there are 2 additional sections for the jib. Let me try and go to another angle of that. So this one right here and that one right there. These go on to the jib masts. Is that what they're called? Make sure I got my names correct, because I know people in the chat are going to be like hopping on me if I don't.
Yeah, and I believe they've already added those parts, and we've seen them raising those parts.
Yes, I did have a shot from Lab Padre that I had ready to go, so y'all can see the current status of that. I think they're probably going to be lifting that within the next day or so. They do tend to move pretty quick on these things. I need to close some of these windows. It's getting ridiculous. I usually don't have to worry about this stuff because I'm doing it in the background on my Stream Deck, but I've not been able to use my Stream Deck for like the last 4 or 5 live streams. It's getting quite frustrating. But yeah, so we'll see this thing extend at least 36 meters. I think it wouldn't be surprising if they brought additional sections as well too. But yeah, so that's what it'll take to get this up to its final height. I think they'll probably do the first 5 sections before needing to extend it, possibly even the 6th section. But right now, they've made some really good progress on the base of the tower. And Ryan was saying earlier, it's funny how this crane makes the tower look tiny, but it's actually massive.
Yeah, the tower base is definitely not small. It's like basically 14 meters, on each side, and you've got this massive crane next to it. Just makes this look very small. But yeah, they've made a lot of progress here getting the double-sided steel wall sections installed. They seem to be focusing more on the back side, where they've got the doors to access kind of the back area where the drawworks and the other equipment will be there on the back side. So, and they have set up some scaffolding to begin welding. That'll be kind of the next big phase we'll see, is a lot of welding taking place to get these sections sealed up. That way they can start filling them with concrete.
Yeah, and so as I said before the show, I'm going to anticipate that there's at least one question that asks whether or not this tower can be done before the next launch attempt, and the answer to that is no. So there's a lot of, it does seem like they're moving really fast, but they're not moving as fast as some people seem to imagine they are. So there are a lot of smaller steps in here. As Ryan mentioned, there's a lot of welding that needs to go on. So these wall sections right here are double panels, and they have, I think at this point, have lowered the other back wall onto this. So they're going to have to weld those together on both sides. They're also going to have to weld all the way up on the edges where these rectangular panels meet the corners. So they'll have to do that on 8 locations. And this is like 1-inch thick steel. So those are going to be like multiple pass welds on both sides. You got to do that on the inside and outside. also got to weld the where these T sections join each other. So all of and beyond that, I talked about this before the show with somebody in the back channels, but I believe at least on the rectangular sections, they also have to be welded to the ground. So this is a steel embed plate down here. I think most of y'all will remember that from previous weeks when it was a little bit more easily visible. But you got to weld it down onto that as well too. So both inside and outside. I don't think they, based on some ground images, maybe not necessarily for the corners because it seems to be a few inches off the ground with like shim plates or something like that. But definitely on these sidewalls. So that's a lot of welding that has to be done just so that they can pour the concrete into here. So they do have some scaffolding set up on the outside on this side, and I believe they've maybe started on this side as well too. But I mean, they got to go around all four sides and do the interior as well. So that alone probably won't be finished until the end of next week before you can even begin to think about pouring concrete. And then I imagine they're probably going to want to let that concrete cure for a little bit before they start stacking anything on top. I mean, it is a steel structure, but as soon as you start loading additional sections on it, it is going to put a load on the actual base itself. So I think the idea is not to like preload the structure, but to actually let this cure before you to cure to some level before you start stacking tower sections on it.
Yeah, I think it's possible that, depending on when the next launch happens, they may or may not have maybe one section out here stacked on top, but I don't know what the schedule is going to be on those, if they're going to kind of slowly bring them out or if they're going to have some sort of a pace that they want. But it's possible they may bring a section out, but at the very least, I don't think we're going to have like half of a tower up before the next flight. Structurally, that is, and just because they put the sections, in place, does not mean they're anywhere near ready to actually have anything functional. They're still going to have to, run miles of wiring to control all of the systems. There's going to be all the hydraulic systems they got to hook together. So just because there's a skeleton does not mean it is at all ready to do anything.
Yeah, and I really want to get into this a little deeper since this question keeps coming up. Maybe we can touch enough people that the question gets asked less. But once these tower sections are stacked on top of each other, so for one, they have to like bolt all of these bolts. I used to know this off the top of my head how many there were here. But so they're on each column, front and back, and then they also have to do the diagonal members. And so once that's completed, they have to do that for the whole tower. So once the tower is fully stacked, after that point, they'll come back and weld around each of the columns. You can actually see what they left this unpainted right here for that reason. So they have to do that on each level, all four columns. And then after that, they can come back and fill them with concrete. So they do those one column at a time. They go between each of the four corners and then move up to the next level. But that's a lot of different operations, and that all of that is on top of all the interior work and all that stuff. So it's a very labor intensive process, and it's not just as simple as stacking things on top of each other and bolting them down and then lifting the chopsticks up there. So I think a functional tower, that we shouldn't expect to see a functional tower until like December or January. And with that said, for some reason, the question keeps getting asked over and over again, whether or not they're planning to do this on the first tower or wait for the next one. And I think all the signs that they've given us point towards them doing this, not only in the next launch, but with this tower. And it doesn't really make sense to do anything else, honestly. I mean, this is the older version. Like, if you're going to sacrifice anything, it should be this, right? Like, you don't want to destroy your brand new tower if you're going to destroy one of them. But all of the testing that they've been doing with the landing rails, and now this test with 14.1, swapping out the actuators on the chopsticks, all of the signs point towards them using this tower. I don't think it's even like a question. They're pretty much telling us with their actions that that's what's going to happen. So yeah, that was a long-winded answer to the question that I'm sure is in the queue right now.
Agreed. And I will add that, dude.
Is it in the queue? I want to know. I want to know if it's there.
No, I haven't seen that question yet. But I was just going to add that we know, thanks to the FAA permit for the new crane, that crane operations are supposed to start this coming Friday on June 28th.
And they end in January?
Yeah, it says from June 28th this year to January 28th next year.
Yeah.
So it's just a 6-month probably notice.
Right. And
doesn't mean they're going to be all 6 months, but
yeah, I mean, like I said, SpaceX is really fast, but they're not that fast. So, and honestly, you don't want them. You don't really want them to be that quick. Like you need them to do this the right way. You know, you do find issues down the road when you kind of rush projects, and I don't know. As far as safety concerns go, it's probably best that they don't move as quickly as some people are expecting them to.
I think this tower will go up probably at the same rate that the Tower A did. The main difference with this pad is that the time between the skeleton being up and then being functional is probably going to be a lot less because they have a pretty good idea of how to efficiently do that side of the operation, based off of all the experience they gained from Pad A.
Right. So I guess moving on, but still on the same topic. This continuous flight auger has been busy down here, drilling auger pilings down here. So I think in previous weeks we've seen a little bit of where those go. So maybe I keep opening more things up. I need to stop. But let's see if I can get a better angle of that. Yeah, so we were able to see some of the pilings that are down here, and they appear to largely be in a straight line. I think there's multiple rows of them. I'm not sure exactly where the second row is. I don't know if something that I'm seeing down here, possibly. But it's interesting the way these are situated in a straight line like this. It, as of right now, doesn't necessarily resemble what we saw for Pad A, which is kind of to be expected since it was a retrofit. But I think this is outlining something potentially here. So I think y'all have heard me multiple weeks suggest the possibility of a flame trench down here, and I'm going to stick to that for now because I don't see any signs that it's not going to happen. So, and what this kind of tells us, though, and Ryan kind of pointed this out earlier, is that based on how we know the flame trench at the Massey's test site, like how that was constructed, this is not really like that. If that's what it is, it's not underground walls. That these are basically just pilings. So that does almost suggest like an above ground structure of some sort, which, given how tall the launch mount is, it is possible to have an above ground trench. But with that said, if that is something that is happening here, it's probably not just going to go in one direction, because that's a lot of gas to come out of one area right there, and like to redirect all of that in one angle, I think would be very difficult. So we may, if it happens, see it spread in two directions at least, if not more.
Yeah, I think it's based on the shielding on the legs, the structure that they have in place. It looks like they're at least expecting two sides of the square to be exposed. So I think for a little while we were wondering, is the mount going to be off to one side, or is it going to be, kind of in line diagonally through the tower? And it does look like it's going to, at least where the stack is going to sit, is going to be about in line, diagonally through the tower. But yeah, the grid, seemingly a grid of piles that they have been adding. It doesn't, yeah, it's very confusing. It almost seems like it's meant to support something, as if they're going to like pour a giant pile cap, and then put something on top of that.
Yeah.
But I don't think that what they're going to do is going to be necessarily below ground. Maybe it might be like a couple feet below ground, but it's not going to be like Massey's where it's like 60 some feet underground. Whatever they're going to build here, it's likely going to be above ground, and we'll have to wait until they start to excavate around this area. I imagine they're going to do that as soon as they get the double-sided walls done for the base. And then they'll be able to expose those pile caps. So maybe on the next flyover, we might be able to see more of the pile caps exposed.
I think a momentous moment just happened in the chat. Senti agreed with something I said. That's yeah, so that this is going to be interesting. There's a lot of work left to do before we're going to be able to even really see what's happening here, because as y'all can tell down here, there are stacks, or yeah, I think this is maybe 2 high stacks of rebar cages, which have already been formed. They've got more down here that they're working on. And I think we've been seeing, oh yeah, there's tons of rebar down here. So I think we'll see lots more rebar cages down here, which means they're going to be busy with these pilings for quite a while. I mean, from what I've heard, we're expecting hundreds of them. So that doesn't necessarily surprise me given the possibility of what we're about to see here. But I think a multi-directional trench would be very interesting, and it's easy. The hard part is going to be like where they actually pick the booster up from, if that's the case, if it's an above ground structure, because then that may require a ramp leading up to it, which is probably challenging given the space here. So but again, the actual launch mount itself is tall enough for something like that. It's just really comes down to, with the number one, with the shorter arms on the chopsticks, like how something like that works, given that you still need to be able to reach out and grab the booster.
Yeah, there's a very finite area that they need to have access to in order to actually pick up the vehicles with the arms, because they only swing so far, which kind of a little known fact that on pad A, you've probably seen this in the previous flyovers, but that launch mount is not directly in line with the diagonal through the tower. It is slightly off to one side, purely because they couldn't actually stack the vehicles. If the arms are in this orientation and they go to pick up the vehicle, there actually wasn't enough room for the arms to fit with the launch mount and everything else. So they had to kind of push the launch mount a little bit further, in that direction, in order to actually make it kind of all fit in there. So that does bring up a pretty good point about, if they're going to have some sort of a flame deflector system, what that, the shape that could take up, because there are some limits on where they can and can't put certain hardware. Especially with the shorter arms too, that we presume this tower will have. That also kind of limits, where exactly you can place, because you'll be getting closer and closer to the tower base.
Yeah.
I'm also, just maybe add real quick since we're on the topic, not sure if you still have Nerdle camera pulled up or not, but they are actually adding the connection points. So your feed is delayed there, but you can see they've added the 1 point. Now they've got multiple above the doorway. So that's where those diagonals for the first tower section would bolt into. So placing those into position before they pour the concrete, I presume.
Nice. Yeah, we were just mentioning those a little bit ago. Nice timing on that. Look how many windows I have open. So one of the other things going on down here, they're still working on removing this raised portion where suborbital pad A used to be. They also, I'm sure this was mentioned last week, have this area right here where they have the dewatering system set up. And as far as we know, they have drilled several piles in this location as well too. We don't really necessarily know. We don't have any idea what's going to go here as of right now. But it does seem like some sort of large structure is probably going to go in this area. I think some theories have mentioned the possibility of like a water tower, which would be interesting. I think some people were mentioning that it's not necessarily in a great spot. It's if that's what it is, because it doesn't fully deflect around the shadow of this building, the structure right here. Let's not look at it from that direction. Maybe this one. Yeah, so you can kind of see it. It isn't fully blocked by the wall that will go here. So not 100% sure what's going on here, but it does look like whatever it is, they're going to start working on it here soon. I can't tell if this looks like it's a pad for another crane to sit on.
Yeah, they've actually been. That was where they were constructing the boom buster sections.
Okay. Yeah, I thought we were seeing them set up for whatever is going to happen right here. But whatever it is, they'll have to dig all this out and form the pile cap for it first. And then that may give us some clues on what's going to happen here. But yeah, things are getting very exciting.
I think one of the common ideas is it's kind of like a booster staging pad like they have near pad A, which they don't use that anymore. So I don't necessarily think it's for staging vehicles. And, just like with pad A's, early on in construction, we did actually see them do something similar where there was a giant square that they dug out and they filled with concrete and rebar. But I'm just not sure of the purpose, that one of those would serve here, since we know that they've got, testing that they do elsewhere now.
Especially
so
right now, of all the times, like, to build it now would be weird.
And it's interesting is, its location is interesting just because of how it's kind of in the shadow, but kind of not, yet they have a lot of other space that they could develop if they needed to. It just seems like an interesting place to put something.
Do you think maybe it could be the pad where they offload tower sections?
That's what I was just going to ask. Could that be just a temporary spot for the tower sections?
I'm just not sure if that would require piles, especially if they're resting on SPMTs, they're kind of distributing the load across the dirt. Granted, they are a little heavy, but I'm not sure. I feel like a pile of gravel could suffice too.
Right. Oops. Kind of swung myself over to the right there, or the left. I'm surprised that we haven't seen them make more progress on this right here, but it's tough to tell whether or not they're going to raise the rest of this up around here or not.
Yeah, and the fact that they just finally got to tearing apart the rest of the berm there is kind of telling that they're finally getting onto that area.
Right. Yeah,
I'm curious if they will reuse the bunker that they had here with a little tent structure. I'm curious if they're going to reuse that for all the electronics for the next tower, or if they're going to build a whole new system.
I've kind of been expecting them to remove this soon. So I know their new all their electrical, their 3-phase electrical comes in right here. You can see all the boxes down there. I don't think that this bunker was ever fully connected to that system. It still had generators outside of it. So I don't think this is actually connected to that 3-phase system. So I'm pretty sure we'll probably see them construct another bunker, probably over in this area, maybe. And it seems like did they remove, this building was twice as long, right?
Yes. Yeah, they removed that portion of it.
Okay. So it looks like they may be, and I think they removed, were there containers here?
Yeah, there
Yeah.
were. Yeah, that part of the container wall is all gone now, presumably to add another concrete wall.
A concrete wall, or I've heard suggestions about another entrance. I think that wouldn't be too unreasonable considering how ridiculous of a turn this is right here.
I mean, it depends on where they want to put the entrance. If they put it there, that's one thing. I was kind of envisioning it being on the other side of Starhopper, where they have the horizontal trailers currently, where the bathrooms used to be. But yeah, I suppose either way, um, they're probably going to remove all of those containers.
I'm still expecting Starhopper to move.
That will bring such an uproar in the community.
I mean, they don't have to get rid of it, but just move it, you know?
Oh, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, unless there's some other structure in this area, depending on how the potential trench looks, I mean, it could get a straight shot of that exhaust plume. I mean, it already takes enough damage as it is from this launch mount with this wall in the way.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, it's technically in the line of that one too, because one of the leg exits points directly in that direction, so it's possible. In terms of like where the entrance would go, I kind of thought it would go between the end of these tanks and Starhopper. They'd remove the ramp there, flatten all that out since there's a little bit of a slope there, and then you basically pull in with your vehicle and you either go left or right depending on which orbital pad you're going to. But
right.
with the tower orientation being a little different in the launch mount, and the potential for some sort of a flame deflector that's different, yeah, we might have to wait and see, I guess, what they're going to do for how the vehicles might actually make their way over to the stacking location.
Right. Cool. Do we have any other any questions on the orbital pad B area?
We got a lot. I want to start out by thanking Felix11 with a $10 super chat. Is the first level of the tower completely filled with concrete, or is it hollow? Really enjoy the analysis you guys do every week.
Thank you. And yeah, we mentioned this will be filled with concrete. I mean, it's currently hollow, but you can see these aren't necessarily for the concrete per se. I
Way
don't
to
think they have
hold
actual
the
studs in here.
Yeah, that's probably to hold the walls from squishing outwards when the concrete expands. It's heavy
Yeah.
as they fill it, so it doesn't fall apart.
All right, and want to give a shout out to our own Rocket Prophet who gifted 10 memberships. We also got another $2 super chat from Pete 2.0 with a thumbs up. We got a question from Kiana, I believe it is, or a statement like, yeah, I have no idea how SpaceX could take off the top section of Tower 1 for extension, really, if they do what they did to the, I believe, gas tanks or GSE tanks, but with a crane, but I really don't know.
From my point of view, it's not possible. So as we just mentioned, that this is full of concrete. So not only are you having to it's not as simple as just unbolting and lifting it off. Like you have to cut through it. You'd have to completely sever the actual section and remove it. And I don't think you would just want to like weld something on top of it after you cut it like that. So in my opinion, it's not possible to extend this because of the way it's constructed. So I wouldn't be surprised if they end up just dropping the whole tower. Like, if especially if the second one is extended. I mean, the second one already has a taller base, and that alone may be enough for them to have to completely redo this. I think it's going to be very hard for them to retrofit this. I think we're more likely to see them actually completely demolish this.
Agreed. And Cindy was just asking, does the new base being taller mean the new tower will be taller?
If they're using the same sections, which for the most part the sections are, they add up, they're the same height. So if the base is taller and you take the same length and you just stack it on top of that, it's naturally going to be a few meters taller than this tower is. But we don't necessarily know if that increase in height at the base is due to a requirement for the vehicles or if it's a requirement for the new launch mount design. Because it's in terms of the variables that they can adjust here, if they already have tower sections that were made, which presumably these tower sections were made quite a while ago, maybe the new vehicle design has come down the pipe, and they have a different launch mount design that they want to try out. It's possible that different mount, which we believe that they're going to go with based on everything else that we've seen, it's possible that mount requires a little bit more clearance at the base, and so they can reuse the sections that were fabricated, at this point, maybe a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, and they can, use them with this, updated design.
Agreed. And on that note, Ulrich Miller is asking, the existing two towers keep the size because they're sufficient for V2 ships and launching V2 Starlink sats. All new towers, even OLM2, will have an additional segment for V3.
I imagine that they'll want to do V2 and V3 on the same launch structure. Obviously, V3 will probably require another upgrade potentially for the change in height of the QD. So that's one thing to consider. But I imagine that once they move on to V3, they're not going to continue flying V2 vehicles. So you wouldn't want, there wouldn't necessarily be a need for two separate launch structures.
I would hope that this tower would be designed with the potential of facilitating version 3 ships, but I also didn't think that they would take down the Gateway to Mars sign wall. So I'm going to leave that maybe a little more open-ended and just say that, we'll find out when we find out.
Agreed.
All right. And both Hash Magandi and Loxon Methane Sandwich both have a similar question. Does the team think the OLM at Tower 1 will get demolished like the one at KSC and replaced with a completely new design?
I think so, yeah. They'll probably wait a little bit to see if this new design kind of fixes the concerns that they have with the current design. And then if it does, they may, make an exact copy of it, or they, knowing SpaceX, they'll probably optimize additional features, and it will turn out to be kind of like a 1.5 version of kind of the newest version where they'll implement some minor changes. But at the very least, I do expect that the launch mount for Pad A will get demolished and replaced at some point, especially if they want that pad to be able to facilitate, V2 ships and boosters, and possibly even V3 in the future.
Agreed. And another one from Loxon Methane Sandwich. I've heard from people who have been correct about a lot of stuff in the past that the new launch mount will be movable like the Massey stand. Do you think that's possible?
It's not impossible. By having a movable stand, then you're able to more quickly perform maintenance. So, if for some reason they had a much larger version of the transport stand, I imagine that would be pretty heavy to keep on the road. But being able to move that back and forth to the Sanchez site and service them could be a solution. Like maybe you can use them like 4 or 5 times in a row before you need to service them type thing. I think that's certainly a possibility. Definitely going to have to wait to start to see signs of that, though.
I don't think it would be movable, just from the standpoint that if it is movable, it's not moving very far. Because in order to design something that can hold that much mass, because we're not just talking boosters, we're talking boosters plus ships plus completely fueled. And if we're considering, version 2 and version 3, there's also additional propellant mass to consider with that design. And movable, linearly from, point A to point B. Like, for instance, if we're looking at this image on screen, from, where they're currently drilling piles, if that's where the launch mount ends up, maybe it moves, in one direction vertically, over behind the tower, and that's where they actually put vehicles, on the mount. That kind of defeats the purpose of having the tower arms to lift vehicles onto the mount itself. So I think that kind of adds complexity, and I don't think that they'd be able to design something capable of holding that mass, that would be able to drive, say back to the build site to pick up a booster. Because then you have the question of, how do you stack the ship? Well, you'd have to use the tower arms to stack the ship. So ultimately, I don't think a movable mount is really possible. Plus, you have to consider all of the GSE connections, depending on what design they go with. The Massey's design for the flame trench is pretty good, but will that work with a booster, with all of the additional connections that they possibly need for Raptor QDs? How does that design kind of play into a movable stand? And I just don't see a movable stand being a possibility.
For the record, I don't think it has to be able to move with a booster on top. Any more questions?
Yeah, we have several more. One is, have we seen any evidence of a flame trench yet, or what system will be used by Star Soon?
Not yet, other than some locations of the pilings, but that's not really necessarily enough to go off of yet.
All right, and Cinti wants to know, how much taller is the new base?
I think I have not modeled the new base. I know there's a couple people who have been modeling the new base. I know rough measurements. I believe it's about 2 meters taller, maybe 2 to 3 meters, but I don't think it's any more than that.
Okay, so not too much taller, but slightly taller. And now, Bandian, what do you guys think about the cadence of flights with one tank farm supplying 2 towers? What would the turnaround here time be realistically? Do we need more tanks?
I know this has been debated more recently on whether or not they need another tank farm, whether they share the tanks, and specifically, I guess what this question is getting at, which is how does that affect the launch cadence? And I think from a simple standpoint, sharing the tanks right now would not be a limiting factor. In terms of the build rate, they're not really building the vehicles at a rate where they're launching, multiple times a month. And if it only takes, let's stretch the fill time of the tank to maybe a week. Let's say it takes a week to fill up these common tanks. You would launch, take a week to fill up the tanks, launch the next week. That still is ahead of their construction cadence, at this point in time. Now, where it becomes a little bit more of a problem is if they start getting down to the point where they have vehicles cranked out, multiple times a week when they go to to test, and then they have the potential to launch multiple times per week. I think at that point is when they really need to start considering additional propellant storage. But I don't think that we're going to be at that point for maybe 2 years. but I'd love to be wrong.
Even 2 times a month, you may run into issues if you have to perform a static fire each time.
Agreed.
And your wet dress rehearsal.
Yeah, that doesn't that doesn't factor in the wet dress rehearsals for sure.
And seismic, what is all the scaffolding next to the Pad A berm?
That's a good question. I was looking at that earlier, and I'm not sure. These look like crane sections for no.
Yeah, those are
They
the
LR 11,000
actually those are the extensions for Grover.
Grover.
When they, yeah, that's what they were using to reach the SQD.
I was about to say those look kind of small to be for the LR 11,000. Cool. Well, do we have any final questions?
Yeah, some regarding Flight 4. Did they recover anything either from the booster or ship? And that's from Bork Laporte.
I don't think we know if they did or not. Presumably, they knew where the booster went into the water at. Whether or not they were able to approach the booster, I don't think we know. I don't think SpaceX will necessarily tell us that, but it might be a little difficult for them to recover parts of the ship, considering how far off target it did land. We don't know if the vehicle, was floating or if it had holes and it sank relatively quickly. I don't think we know any details about that.
Agreed. Won't the CO2, this is from Stephen Lewis, won't the CO2 and H2O ice, water ice in the ullage melt and contaminate the Raptors after landing?
This is actually something I've kind of thought about with their desire for rapid reusability. Yeah, what happens if there is a booster full of, say, combustion byproducts, and they land it, and whether they detank on the mount or whatever they do, what does that mean for the next time that they fill up the tanks? Is there going to be progressively a larger buildup of contaminants inside the tanks, or is there going to be a process in order to clean those out? I think that's we're still a ways off from that actually being a realistic concern, I think, but I do think that is a concern that we don't really have an answer for.
Okay. And Space Girl X, how soft did the booster land in the ocean?
I think the last bit of telemetry we had, I think it might have started actually going back. I think it actually kind of picked back up, so it's kind of hard to tell. But I think was it like 9 kilometers an hour was maybe the last number that was frozen on screen, if I remember correctly. But I think it got pretty close to zero. I think it did hit zero at one point, and then it may have started to raise back up.
Agreed. A couple of other questions here. We got 3 more left. From Jeff S. Jones, water runoff collected for water deluge system from the roof. You're talking about Star Factory.
No. The water that they use in the deluge system has to be treated. So they would have to first run it through a treatment facility before they could use it in the deluge system.
Okay. Crane Man, did you guys find out what the new black counterweights are for? Are they for a new crane for Massey's?
I'm not sure which new counterweights he's referring to. The only ones I've seen are at the launch site, but do you know of any other elsewhere?
Yeah, they do actually. We've been talking about this the last couple of weeks. There's at that storage lot off Highway 4, there's a whole bunch of new counterweights.
I do not see them.
Oh,
Right there
they
on the
are.
right.
Right here. No idea. Yeah, I haven't gotten into small details like that lately. But I mean, they could be. I think they look like they're too small for the LR 11,000.
All right, we're almost done. Big Lucius, any chance Starhopper ends up in the triangle area in front of the office building like the Falcon is at Hawthorne?
I think that might have been proposed. So last week.
What just happened?
I'm not sure if
the
there's enough
building.
room for it there. I think some people might have suggested it was going to go kind of back behind the building in kind of like that courtyard area. Yeah,
would
I'm
suck.
not sure.
We'd never be able to see it again.
Yeah.
Agreed. I think they want to keep Hopper. If they're not going to scrap it, I think they're going to want to keep it visible.
I think they'd probably put a parking lot in front of this building, like a little square one for maybe visitors or something. So I don't think they would necessarily put like a trophy piece here at the front corner, but could be wrong.
Agreed. A couple of shout outs. Bob Fillmore became a RGV flight supporter. Yop Kippers gifted a membership. And we have one last question for Zach from Lyric Bread. Is Zach going to play the lottery since Cynthia agreed with him?
I actually never played the lottery. I don't know why. I just don't like wasting money. Well,
all right. Well,
yeah, I suppose we're at the end of the show then. This didn't go quite as long as some of the others do, but you got to work with what there is to talk about. So definitely appreciate all of you for being here with us today. And I rarely mention this during the show, but make sure to hit the like button if you haven't already. Definitely helps us out with the algorithm. And to everybody who received gift memberships, if you haven't tested it out already, you should have access to the full gallery of flyover images. So if you want to go through them yourself, you should have access to that. And that also goes for Patreon members as well too. So yeah, definitely check those out if you haven't. It gives you a chance to kind of go through them at your own pace and zoom in on things that you may have had additional questions on that we may or may not have gotten to today. So yeah, I want to thank Ryan for hopping on with me today. Always fun having you on. I do work quite closely with Ryan on nearly every episode I put out. So always nice having you on the show. And also thank you to Lawrence for handling all the questions and donations for us. And also big thanks to Mauricio from RGV for getting up there every week and taking all these images for us, because we really wouldn't have the same understanding of the way things work out here without them. So yeah, with that, I will pass it on to Ryan.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun to go through these photos with everybody and kind of hear everybody's ideas on different aspects of the construction sites. I know SpaceX, moving quickly on a lot of these projects, and there's a lot of interesting things to see. And as the buildings have gotten bigger, it's harder to see some of the intricate details kind of behind the scenes unless you have an eagle eye view. So these flyovers definitely help a lot for being able to pick out, some of the details and just see, really what's going on here as the most sophisticated rocket factory, built on a sandbar is evolving. And, hopefully we can get more and more boosters and ships here to increase the flight cadence. It should be a really cool year ahead of us here.
Lawrence, do you want to do the sign off?
I can do that, and I appreciate being on here with both Zach and Ryan, who are so knowledgeable about the subjects, and I really appreciate the RGV team for doing these flyovers and other ground shots for us, and every week, and when they can. So much information gleaned from these, and as Astro Joe would normally say, thank you for joining us. Main engine cut off. Stage separation confirmed. Love you. Bye.